Mr. Vikram Nair.
Mr. Speaker, I support the motion standing in the name of the Leader of the House, Ms. Indrani Raja. I also disagree with the motion standing in the name of Ms. Hazel Pua, calling for the suspension of Mr. Ishwaran until the end of his term in Parliament. Now, our role as an MP, Mr. Speaker, ultimately comes from the mandates at the ballot box. It should therefore not be taken away lightly. A Member of Parliament is not an employee, but rather is self-employed. Being a Member of Parliament gives a person certain privileges, including the right to attend and speak in Parliament. Now, related to this, while an MP is self-employed, where an MP is elected on a party platform, that MP is also accountable to the party and the party's rules. Ultimately, the party is also, in turn, accountable to the electorate. So if a party puts a member on leave of absence, that party would ultimately be accountable to the electorate to ensure the electorate continues to be served. So these are all mechanisms that include checks and balances within themselves. So there are clear provisions, Mr. Speaker, that allow members' rights to be suspended. These are set out in the Parliament Privileges, Immunities and Powers Act 1962, which I will refer to as PIPA for short, and the Standing Orders for Parliament. Section 20 of PIPA sets out the punitive powers of Parliament. And these punitive powers include, under Section 20C, the powers to suspend a member. So let's be very clear. Suspension is a punitive measure. These powers can only be exercised where a member has engaged in 1, dishonorable conduct, 2, abused privilege, or 3, engaged in contempt of Parliament. Now, I don't think any of these accusations are currently being made in this motion against Mr. Ishwaran. The subsequent sections, such as Section 21 of PIPA, set out the process for making determinations. I would add that generally, fair process should be accorded to a member before his privileges are suspended. Now, Ms. Pua seems to agree with this principle and acknowledges that ultimately, this is a matter that will be determined by the investigation process and, if necessary, by a court thereafter. Now, generally, fair process includes a member being made aware of the allegations against him and being given a chance to answer it. So if Parliament wishes to exercise punitive powers before an investigation is concluded, then that member should be given a chance to answer those allegations. Now, clearly, I would suggest that in this case, that would not be appropriate because Mr. Ishwaran is investigating is being investigated by the CPIB. Those investigations are taking place, other witnesses are being called. It would be a bit of a circus for a second investigation to take place in Parliament over the exact same set of facts. Now, where there has been no determination that Mr. Ishwaran has committed any crimes or engaged in dishonorable conduct, I would suggest that the punitive powers of Parliament should not be exercised yet. In general, a person is presumed to be innocent until he has been convicted, and Mr. Ishwaran should be accorded the same rights as every other person has. Now, the Standing Orders of Parliament have one provision dealing with the suspension of a member, and this is Order 59. Now, I think Ms. Pua referred to Order 59.5, which says that nothing in this order will take away the general powers of Parliament to suspend a member. But what is interesting is Order 59 is actually an order that deals with the powers of the Speaker to propose the suspension of a member, 1, for disregard for the authority of the Chair, or 2, persistently and willfully obstructing the business of Parliament. So this is the only express grounds in the Standing Orders of Parliament that allow for the suspension of a member. Now, while these provisions have been used by speakers in some other jurisdictions, in Singapore, I think this powers, I'm not aware of any case where this power has been used to suspend a member. So I would suggest that, if we are going to stray outside these express provisions that give Parliament the power to suspend a member, we have to be crystal clear on the principles being applied. It also goes against the principle of retrospective criminality for us to see what has happened and then decide that is wrong. It is important for laws to set out very clearly what is wrong first so that people know what standards they have to abide by. Now, let me just, and if you look at this motion objectively, what is happening here is, if you just look at the facts, I think Ms. Phua was Mr. Ishwaran's opponent in West Coast GRC and has now put up a motion calling for his suspension. Now, if this is set as a precedent, imagine what this power would do in the opposite side. If a ruling party were to decide they want to suspend a member without any clear principle basis, those motions would pass, if the party whip were exercised. And clearly that would not be a precedent we want to set. So I would suggest that members be very, very slow to put forward motions calling for the suspension of another member, especially where there has been no clear principle basis for this. Now, related to this, I think Ms. Phua is proposing an amendment to PIPA, which is legislation. Generally, legislation is meant to address the country at large and is not meant to be targeted at an individual or a particular case. It would actually be quite unprincipled to amend legislation for a single case. Additionally, if this legislation is meant to apply to Mr. Ishwaran for conduct he engaged in prior to the legislation coming into place, this would also be a breach of the principle that legislation should not impose criminal liability retrospectively. For this reason, I also do not agree with the proposed amendments to the legislation. So, in brief, Mr. Speaker, I agree with the leader that at this time we do not have enough information to make a decision to suspend Mr. Ishwaran, and none of the clear provisions for suspension set out in both PIPA and the standing orders apply. I therefore support her motion. I also disagree with the motion put forward by Ms. Hazel Phua, because I believe that the powers of suspension should be exercised only in accordance with the express requirements of PIPA and the standing orders. Thank you.